And I will go ahead and play the first video for large quantity generators. Good afternoon, everyone. In this part of the training, I'll go over the generator improvement rule as it pertains to large quantity generators of hazardous waste. So I'll go over some rule history and some definitions before getting into what's changed in the regulations for large quantity generators. Some acronyms that a lot of you will already be familiar with. I just want to highlight a few of these. LQG refers to large quantity generators of hazardous waste. And although this session is focused on LQGs, I do want to point out that conditionally exempt quantity generators, or CESQGs, are now referred to as very small quantity generators, or VSQGs. I also want to bring your attention to CAAs, central accumulation areas, which were previously referred to as either 180-day accumulation areas for small quantity generators or 90-day accumulation areas for large quantity generators. Some rulemaking background. RCRA, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, was enacted by Congress in 1976 with the goal of protecting human health and the environment, conserving energy and natural resources, and waste reduction. So you can see the timeline of the regulatory framework governing solid waste and hazardous waste with the Solid Waste Disposal Act of 1980. And in that same year, generator regulations for hazardous waste also became effective in Delaware. And then followed by the Hazardous and Solid Waste Amendments of 1984, and then the final EPA generator rules promulgated in 1986. This is a flowchart of the Waste Regulatory Program as promulgated in 1980, where you can see wastes are broken down into three categories: municipal solid waste, industrial solid waste, and hazardous waste. The hazardous waste program is then split into three programs: waste generation, waste management, and implementation. The new rule grew out of several evaluations conducted by the ORCR, the Office of Resource Conservation and Recovery, in 2004, and then again in 2013 and 2014. They accepted comments from the public in order to identify issues with the existing rule and find ways to improve program effectiveness. The rule was proposed in September of 2015 and presented more than 60 possible changes for public comment. The final rule was published in 2016 and finally adopted by the state of Delaware effective January of this year. The new rule aims to make the regulations governing hazardous waste more user-friendly to the regulated community to improve compliance. It also provides flexibility in the areas of episodic generation and VSQG, LQG waste consolidation. The new rule also addresses some gaps and clarifies ambiguities in the regulations. Some citation changes. As you can see from this table, the regulations were reorganized so that provisions applicable to generators of hazardous waste would be in sequential order and easier to navigate. So instead of being scattered throughout parts 261 and 262, provisions for hazardous waste generators are mostly found in sections 262.11 through 262.17. Some of the new provisions are either more stringent or less stringent than the previous rule. Marking and labeling, closure notifications, annual reporting, emergency preparedness, planning, and SAA provisions are all more stringent, while the SQG consolidation and the 50-foot setback waiver are less stringent. Some definitions were changed or clarified in the new rule. Definitions for acute and non-acute hazardous waste and central accumulation areas were added to section 260.10. Generator categories were also clarified in this section. 262.10 was also restructured for clarity and removed some provisions that are now obsolete. So getting into what's changed for LQGs. Starting with section 262.11 on making hazardous waste determinations. We've clarified that hazardous waste determinations must be accurate. So it's not only the responsibility of the generator to make the determination, but to ensure that it is an accurate hazardous waste determination. The new rule also clarifies a few things about when and how to make a hazardous waste determination. Hazardous waste determinations must be made at the point of generation before any diluting, mixing, or any other alteration occurs, and at any other time over the course of managing the waste that it may have changed its properties. So at any point since it was generated that it may change the RCRA classification of the waste. Going through the hazardous waste determination process. The first step in determining if the waste you generated is a hazardous waste is to determine first if it is a solid waste. The definition of a solid waste is shown here. I won't read the whole thing, but solid waste is any garbage, refuse, rubbish, or sludge from treatment processes or other discarded materials from industrial or commercial operations. This definition is not limited to wastes that are physically solid. It also includes semi-solids, liquids, and containerized gases as well. Section 261.2, it is defined as any discarded material that is not excluded in sections 261.4a or sections 260.30 and 260.31. Discarded refers to material that is abandoned, disposed of, burned, accumulated, stored, treated, recycled in certain ways, or inherently waste-like. If your waste fits the definition of a solid waste, the next step is to determine if it is excluded from regulation. Exclusions are outlined in section 261.4 as either A, materials that are not solid waste. This refers to secondary materials that are reclaimed and returned to the original process. Or B, waste that are solid waste but not a hazardous waste. And C, hazardous waste that are exempt from regulations. Exclusions and exemptions are listed in section 261.4. If your waste is not excluded or exempt, you have to determine if it is a listed hazardous waste. The hazardous waste list identifies specific waste streams that are harmful to human health and the environment. F-listed wastes are from non-specific manufacturing process sources, while K-listed wastes are from specific industrial sources. P and U wastes are acutely toxic and toxic unused commercial chemical products. A generator can use their knowledge of the waste, its origin and composition, or other reliable process knowledge to determine if their waste meets any of the definitions of the list in Part 261, Subpart D. If your waste is not a listed waste, you have to determine if the waste is characteristic. The four characteristics of hazardous waste are ignitable, corrosive, toxic, and reactive. These are all defined in detail in Part 261, Subpart C. And again, generators can use their knowledge of the process or the waste to make these determinations. If the information available is not enough to make an accurate hazardous waste determination, then the waste must be tested to determine if it has any of the characteristics of hazardous waste. So just to recap the process, you can refer to this flow chart when making hazardous waste determinations and ask yourself, is it a solid waste? If it's not, then the material is not subject to RCRA Subtitle C regulation. If it is, then you have to determine whether the waste is excluded or exempt from being a hazardous waste. Otherwise, you have to determine if the waste is either a listed hazardous waste or a characteristic hazardous waste. If it is and it has not been delisted, then the waste is subject to RCRA Subtitle C regulation. Once you've made a hazardous waste determination, large quantity generators are required to maintain records supporting their hazardous waste determinations for at least 3 years. This includes records that identify whether a waste is a solid waste or whether a solid waste is a hazardous waste. Records must include, but are not limited to, the results of any testing or sampling, validation records documenting the method used, records determining the process by which the waste was generated, or records explaining the generator's knowledge basis for making the determination. If your waste is determined to be hazardous, large quantity generators are required to mark all containers with the applicable waste codes in subpart C and D of Part 261 prior to shipping waste off-site. Lab packs that will be incinerated are not required to be marked with waste codes except for the heavy metals listed here with those specific waste codes. Once you've determined that you generate hazardous waste, the next step is determining your generator category. The new rule clarifies that generators must determine their category and outlines the process of determining your generator category. Section 262.13 clarifies the process of determining your generator category for acute and non-acute hazardous waste, as well as which materials need to be counted and which don't. This determines which provisions of these regulations will apply. Previously, there was some ambiguity as to whether a generator can be two different categories based on acute and non-acute generation. The new rule emphasizes that acute, non-acute, and cleanup residues of hazardous waste are all considered when determining your monthly generation category. Now, your generation category can change from one month to the next, but we do caution that this makes it difficult to demonstrate compliance with a different category each month. You'll see in Table 1 in Section 262.13 how your generator category is based on all three waste categories combined: non-acute hazardous waste, acute hazardous waste, and cleanup residues of acute hazardous waste. So you will be considered a large quantity generator if you generate more than 1 kilogram of acute hazardous waste, or 1,000 kilograms or more of non-acute hazardous waste, or more than 100 kilograms of cleanup residue of acute hazardous waste. There are some clarifications regarding mixtures of solid and hazardous waste. Mixtures of hazardous waste and solid waste are subject to the mixture rule, the dilution rule, the land disposal restriction rule, and the waste determination requirements in 262.11. A mixture of hazardous waste and solid waste is still considered hazardous waste. Diluting hazardous waste is not allowed unless it provides a useful contribution. So a diluted hazardous waste is still a hazardous waste. If the hazardous waste was diluted to remove a characteristic, the dilution process could be considered treatment and subject to those additional requirements. The resulting waste would still be managed as a solid waste and be subject to land disposal restrictions. The generator improvement rule included streamlined process for waste consolidation, specifically an LQG accepting waste from one of their own VSQG sites for consolidation. The old rule required LQGs to obtain a RCRA permit to receive waste. Under the new rule, a VSQG can send waste to an LQG under the same control, meaning owned by the same person, without requiring a manifest. The VSQG simply has to mark the containers with the words hazardous waste and an indication of the hazard. That would be either the characteristic of the waste or the appropriate pictogram or placard. I'll get into labeling requirements shortly. The LQG is then required to notify DNREC of the activity, maintain records of each shipment, mark each container with the accumulation start date once they arrive at the LQG, manage the waste the same as LQG hazardous waste from cradle to grave, and report the waste received in their annual report. Section 262.17 outlines the conditions for exemption for large quantity generators. I already mentioned this a couple of slides ago, but large quantity generators generate more than or equal to 1,000 kilograms or 2,200 pounds of hazardous waste each calendar month, or more than 1 kilogram, 2.2 pounds of acutely hazardous waste per calendar month, or more than 100 kilograms or 220 pounds of acutely hazardous waste cleanup residue in a calendar month. Large quantity generators cannot store hazardous waste on site for more than 90 days. Marking and labeling requirements for large quantity generators. In the old rule, generators were not required to identify RCRA waste codes. The the new rule specifies that large quantity generators are required to mark containers with the applicable RCRA waste codes in subparts C and D, or some other nationally recognized system that functions in the same way prior to sending waste off-site. This ensures that the TSDF knows how to treat the waste to meet land disposal restriction requirements. The new rule also clarifies that the requirement to mark containers with an indication of the hazard of the contents applies throughout the regulations. So they apply for containers in central accumulation areas, drip pads, tanks, and containment buildings. These all require labels that include the words hazardous waste, an indication of the hazard of the contents, and the accumulation start date. Here are some examples of acceptable pictograms that indicate the hazard of the contents, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a pictogram. You can use any of the following to indicate the hazard of the contents of your hazardous waste containers. The applicable RCRA hazardous waste characteristic, i.e. ignitable, corrosive, reactive, toxic, or Department of Transportation hazard communications, or the appropriate OSHA hazard statement or pictogram, or NFPA chemical hazard labels. You don't have to use all of these. One of them will suffice as long as you're indicating the hazard of the contents of your hazardous waste containers. For drip pads and containment buildings, the generator can keep this information in logs or records near the accumulation unit. So I'll go over some labeling examples in the next slide. So imagine that you see this label on a hazardous waste container in your central accumulation area. Does this label meet the labeling requirements that I just mentioned? This session is pre-recorded, but I can give people time if they want to answer in the chat. Looking at it, it includes the words hazardous waste, and it lists the accumulation start date. So if anyone in the chat has noticed that it's missing the indication of the hazard of its contents, then you got that correct. Moving on to the next example, it includes the words hazardous waste, it has the words corrosive on it, and it also includes the OSHA pictogram for corrosive. We know that either one of those will suffice to indicate the hazard of the content, but if anyone in the chat has answered that the accumulation start date is missing, then you got that correct. Now, in this next one, does it look like anything is missing from this label? It includes the accumulation start date, it has the words hazardous waste, and it has the pictogram indicating that it is corrosive. So if anyone answered in the chat that that label meets all the label requirements, then you also got that correct. Now I could change that pictogram for the word corrosive, and that would still meet all of those requirements. Now, if I was preparing to ship this container to a treatment, storage, or disposal facility, then I would have to add the applicable waste codes. You don't have to entirely identify the contents, you just need to use the waste codes listed in subparts C and D. When accumulating hazardous waste in tanks, how can a generator demonstrate compliance and ensure that the tank is emptied or turned over within 90 days? Well, the new rule specifies that large quantity generators must use inventory logs, monitoring equipment, or other records to demonstrate that for a batch process, the tank is being emptied every 90 days for large quantity generators, and for a continuous flow process that the estimated volumes of hazardous waste entering the tank daily are exiting the tank within 90 days. So we've covered central accumulation areas. Now moving on to some clarifications in the new rule regarding satellite accumulation areas. The new rule clarifies that waste in satellite accumulation areas cannot be mixed or placed in a container with incompatible waste. The new rule also specifies when containers are allowed to remain temporarily open in your satellite accumulation area, such as when adding or removing waste or to avoid a potentially dangerous situation from pressure buildup in a container. Acute hazardous waste accumulation limits are for satellite accumulation areas are given now in weight and volume for clarity. So the limit is 55 gallons for non-acute hazardous waste, and either 1 quart or 1 kilogram, that's roughly 2.2 pounds, of acute hazardous waste are allowed in your satellite accumulation area. If the maximum accumulation limits in your SAA are exceeded, then that waste must be transferred immediately to a central accumulation area or on-site interim treatment or an off-site facility. The term immediately is defined for the purposes of this provision to mean within the same shift that the maximum accumulation limit was exceeded in your satellite accumulation area. The new rule also clarifies that satellite accumulation area containers must be stored at or near the point of generation, and they're required to be marked with the words hazardous waste, an indication of the hazard of its contents. Moving on to emergency preparedness and planning. The old rule required that generators attempt to make arrangements with local emergency responders, mainly the local fire department, police department, and hospital. The new rule allows generators to make these arrangements with the local emergency planning committee, or LEPC, if that is determined to be the appropriate organization to make those arrangements with. Generators are required to document that they have attempted to make those arrangements or that arrangements were sought but not obtained, and keep that documentation in the site's operating record. Large quantity generators are required to submit contingency plans to local emergency responders. These plans can be lengthy, and that can hinder emergency responders' ability to access necessary information at the time of an emergency. The new rule requires large quantity generators to submit a quick reference guide or an executive summary with their contingency plan. This would include the most critical information needed in case of an emergency. This quick guide needs to be updated whenever the contingency plan is otherwise updated. Moving on to what's changed in annual reporting. The old reporting requirements included a lot of inconsistencies between what was stated in the regulations and the instructions on the annual reporting forms. The new requirements do not list any specific reporting elements in the regulations themselves and simply refer generators to the form instructions. The new rule also specifies that if you are an LQG for at least 1 month in the year, you must notify either electronically or using the paper form by March 1st of the following year. If you're a large quantity generator, you are required to report all hazardous waste generated and managed in the reporting year, even for months that you are not a large quantity generator. Moving on to closure. Previously, only large quantity generators accumulating waste in tanks, drip pads, or containment buildings were required to follow closure procedures. This resulted in documented cases of large quantity generators accumulating waste in containers, abandoning their sites, and eventually requiring Superfund removal action. The new rule includes closure requirements for large quantity generators accumulating hazardous waste in containers. If you are closing an accumulation area within your site, you must place notice in your operating record within 30 days after closure. Identify the location of the unit and meet closure performance standards, and notify DNREC. If you are closing an entire facility, you must notify DNREC no later than 30 days prior to closure and within 90 days after closure. Some additional changes in the regulations worth mentioning. Section 262.17, the 50-foot setback condition for ignitable and reactive waste states that reactive and ignitable waste must not be stored at least 50 feet or 15 meters from the site's property line. The new rule clarifies that large quantity generators may obtain written approval from the authority having jurisdiction over the local fire code, allowing hazardous waste accumulation to occur within this restricted area. Record of the written approval must be maintained as long as ignitable or reactive waste is being accumulated within 50 feet of the site's property line. Section 262.18 specifies that all large quantity generators and small quantity generators within the state shall obtain an EPA ID number either electronically or by using Form 8700-12. Section 262.35 also states that the placement of bulk or non-containerized liquid hazardous waste or hazardous waste containing free liquids is prohibited. So that is an overview of what's changed for large quantity generators in the new generator improvement rule.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nora. We do have one question that I see in the chat. The question is, it was my understanding that if you become an LQG in a given month, that you remained LQG for the rest of the calendar year. Can you please clarify if this is correct? That was correct under the old rule. Under the new rule, you are afforded the ability to change generator status. However, if you do become a large quantity generator at any given time, you have to notify, and you are required to submit an annual report for the entire year, not just the time frame in which you were an LQG. Now, I will caution that under the new rule, bouncing back and forth may be trickier than usual because there is a closure requirement for 90-day areas. So if you were a large and then you decide you want to be a small, you still have to close out that 90-day, and then you would have to open it again and close it again if you're bouncing back and forth. Also, you'll find in the small quantity generator requirements, there is in the rules in general, there's a new episodic generation provision that will be covered that may cover or be more helpful to your site should you be jumping or generating large amounts of hazardous waste for a planned or unplanned event, but that is covered in the generator improvement rule as well. Does that answer your question? Hopefully, Charlotte.
Just wanted to add that so if you're a very small quantity generator and you exceed your limit for, let's say, acute hazardous waste, if you exceed 1 kilogram, you only have to manage the waste that exceeded that amount as a large quantity generator. But if you're a small quantity generator and you exceed that limit, then you have to basically become a large quantity generator. Just a slight difference between those two.
All right. Anyone else have any other questions on the large quantity generator section of the generator improvement rule? Oh, hold on. We have another question. Can you clarify the emergency response arrangements that we are supposed to make with the LEPC or fire department? What exactly are we asking them to do? Is there a form letter template? I will defer to the group on answering this question.
There is not a form letter template. Most times we see a letter to whatever the appropriate emergency response agency is with a description of the types of waste that are generated, any special equipment that may be required for decon or for response. So if you have any, special hazardous waste that, the fire department would need something specific on hand to treat, that would be helpful to put in the letter. And then typically there's also a map with the locations of where your hazardous waste can be found and evacuation routes. Did that fully answer your question, Natalia?
I don't see any other questions in the...
No, I don't either. If you guys think of anything, we're having a Q&A session at the very end as well. So if something pops into your head, feel free to ask it then too. And as well, you can always email us. Did you think of something after? what we're here for.
Hold on, let me address the rest of that question. So Vitali's response was, so we're not looking for a specific response from the LAPC or fire department. Typically, what we tell people is to send it certified mail and maintain the receipt demonstrating that it has been delivered. That way you can demonstrate that you attempted to make arrangements with the emergency response agencies. I think that's all I have on that. So am I missing anything, guys?
No, we can ask them to make arrangements. They're not, the site is only required to make the arrangements. They can't drag the people on site to, follow them, but.
Right. And we can't really force, police or fire or anybody to do anything. So we just want to make sure that sites try to make those arrangements and document it.
Right.
Yes, reach out to them.
Comment in the chat, LAPCs in Delaware are not tasked with responding to incidents. LAPCs plan for emergency response. So the new generator improvement rule allows you to plan for emergencies if you determine that the local LAPC is the appropriate emergency agency to coordinate with. So you will have to reach out to your individual LAPC to determine whether or not they are the appropriate agency. If they are not, then you'll still have to continue to send that notification to local police, fire, and hospital. There's another question about slides being available for distribution and maybe the recording. We will have both the slides and the recording available on our website once we are done.
Yep, and I will go through near the end and show everyone where those trainings will be found.
The slides are already up. The recordings probably won't be up until next week.
All right, wonderful.
Thanks, Chancey.
Any other questions?
That's it. I can go ahead,
All right.
move on to used oil and
Universal waste rule.
There have been a couple of changes to the universal waste and used oil regulations. We will start with an overview of the changes to the universal waste regulations. Specifically, changes have been made to the requirement for universal waste exports and imports, and the ability to manage waste aerosol cans as universal waste has been incorporated. For the purposes of today's training, we will not be reviewing each individual requirement for persons managing transboundary movements of universal waste. Instead, we would like to direct your attention to Part 262, Subpart H of the Hazardous Waste Regulations. All persons managing universal waste, imports and exports are subject to Part 262, Subpart H. Moving on to the second Universal Waste Regulation update, which allows waste aerosol cans to be managed as universal waste. The regulatory definition for aerosol cans is located in Section 273.9 of the Hazardous Waste Regulations and is copied to the slide as a reference. I would like to draw your attention to key characteristics of an aerosol can. First, in order to be considered an aerosol can, the receptacle must not be refillable. Refillable receptacles are not aerosol cans. Second, the receptacle must contain a gas that is either compressed, liquefied, or dissolved under pressure, and the sole purpose of that gas is to expel a liquid, paste, or powder. Lastly, the receptacle must be fitted with a self-closing release device, which allows the contents to be ejected by the gas. For example, an aerosol can that you probably encountered is a can of spray paint. Now let's discuss the requirements for managing waste aerosol cans as universal waste. Essentially, waste aerosol can management requirements, including the ability to manage waste aerosol cans either intact or punctured, are the same for small and large quantity handlers of universal waste. However, there are some differences between punctured and non-punctured waste aerosol can management. The management options and requirements that apply specifically to intact aerosol cans include the flexibility to sort waste aerosol cans by type or mix various types of waste aerosol cans in the same container, the ability to remove actuators to prevent accidental releases, the requirement to place waste aerosol cans in containers that are structurally sound, and the requirement to label each waste aerosol can or the container which is being used to contain waste aerosol cans with the words universal waste aerosol cans, waste aerosol cans, or use aerosol cans. Please note additional universal waste management requirements found in Part 273 apply. Since the act of puncturing a waste aerosol can increases the potential for an accidental release, special requirements have been developed specifically for waste aerosol cans that are punctured and drained of their contents. Handlers of punctured waste aerosol cans must recycle the empty punctured can, use a device designed to safely puncture and drain the waste aerosol cans, establish and follow a written procedure detailing how to safely puncture and drain universal waste aerosol cans, ensure puncturing is done in a manner designed to prevent fires and releases of waste, immediately transfer all drained contents of the waste aerosol cans into a container or tank that meets the requirements of sections 262.14, 262.15, 262.16, or 262.17, conduct an accurate hazardous waste determination on any waste generated from the aerosol puncturing process, including the contents of the aerosol cans, maintain a written procedure to follow in the event of a spill or leak, and provide a spill cleanup kit. If you currently manage universal waste batteries, lamps, or other types of universal waste at your site, you will recognize the requirements on this slide. These requirements aren't new, but their applicability to waste aerosol cans is new. Handlers managing waste aerosol cans as universal waste must maintain an inventory or dating system to demonstrate compliance with the 1-year storage time limit. Their employees must be informed of the types of universal waste on site and the proper handling and emergency procedures for this waste. Universal waste shipment records must be kept for a minimum of 3 years. And as a reminder, universal waste handlers that accumulate at least 5,000 kilograms of universal waste at any time must notify DNREC that they are a large quantity handler of universal waste, and they must obtain an EPID number. While aerosol cans can now be managed as universal waste, sites still have the option to manage intact waste aerosol cans as hazardous waste under Part 262 regulations for your respective generator status. The practice of puncturing aerosol cans is a form of waste treatment, as defined in Section 260.10, that is only permitted for sites that manage their waste aerosol cans as universal waste. In other words, if you wish to manage your site's waste aerosol cans as hazardous waste, you may not puncture your aerosol cans. This concludes the universal waste portion of this presentation. Let's review the changes made to the used oil regulations. The used oil regulations are essentially the same, except we have clarified that Part 279 applies to used oil that is legitimately recycled. Used oil that cannot be legitimately recycled requires a hazardous waste determination, and if determined to be hazardous, the used oil must be managed according to the hazardous waste regulations referenced in Section 279.81a. Conversely, used oil that is not hazardous can be managed as non-hazardous waste. We have also clarified that the used oil must have a minimum energy value of 5,000 BTU per pound in order to be legitimately recycled via an energy recovery process. Otherwise, used oil sent for thermal treatment cannot be legitimately recycled and is subject to the requirements of Subpart I, including the requirements mentioned on the previous slide. This concludes the presentation portion of the training. I encourage you to make a note of our contact information.
All right, thank you, Allie. Thank you, Nora. We have some follow-up questions on the LQG portion. So if you guys are thinking about universal waste or used oil questions, we're going to jump back real quick to the LQG requirements under the new generator improvement rule. The first question is, what are the marks on containers at the satellite area? So satellite accumulation containers must be labeled with the words hazardous waste, and an indication of their hazards. So again, that can be, you write the characteristic, you go with the DOT marking, OSHA tags, and there's another one that I am forgetting.
NFPA.
NFPA, thank you. So it can be written out, it can be a sticker. It's up to you, but it doesn't need an accumulation start date. It just needs hazardous waste and an indication of the hazards. So pretty much when you're taking something from a satellite area and moving it to a central accumulation area, all you're going to be adding is the accumulation start date. In the satellite accumulation area for larges, it's already marked with the labeling that's required in both spots. The second question is, do the signs that are located at the central accumulation area that were called 90-day central accumulations have to be changed to central accumulation area? Now, this might seem confusing because there was no requirement previously or now to actually label your satellite accumulation area. You have to indicate it on maps for the LEPC or emergency so they know where your hazardous waste is stored. But in terms of us touring a site, those don't have to be labeled. Perhaps you're thinking of the no smoking signs. Those will still be required in the central accumulation areas and in satellite accumulation areas for ignitable or reactive wastes. But there's no sign change. So if you had them up in your site, you may leave them up in your site because there's not a requirement to change or label them. All right. Do we have any questions on the universal waste rule or used oil? If not, oh, hold on, I got something that just popped up. Technical difficulties.
Oh, question about the quick reference guide in the contingency plan. Oh, go ahead, Lindsay.
I was like, okay, I can read it. For the contingency quick reference guide, is the quick reference guide due as soon as possible or with the next annual contingency plan update? Is there a general template for what is required or would be at best to reach out responding agencies to determine what they need? So should they reach out to the agency to see what they would require to be helpful in their guide? I will defer to the group. I thought Nora was going to answer that.
You want me to take that one? It does not require, it is not required immediately. So the next time you update your contingency plan, you will have to do the quick reference guide. So it's not something that needs to be done right away, but the next time it is required to be updated, you will need to update it with the quick reference guide. We do not have a template at this point for what should be in the quick reference guide. Maybe that's something we should look into developing, but we don't have anything at this point.
I do believe the regs have a small breakdown as to what's required to be in it, but should you add anything else, that's your discretion. I believe there's a minimum requirement of what must be in there. I don't know it off the top of my head.
Correct. It looks like there's another question, Lindsay.
All right. Oh, I thought Ellie might be researching something. So the next question is there still a P-waste accumulation in addition to generation rate component with regards to LQG determination? In other words, if an SQG never generates more than 1 kilogram per month, but accumulates over 1 kilogram over 2 months, is the SQG now an LQG? Slide 29 does not cover this. So there is, the site, dependent on how we handle P-waste, is there's a whole pharmaceutical rule which covers some P-listed waste. But you have to be a healthcare facility and a pharmaceutical. We will have a separate training on the pharmaceutical rule. For P-list accumulation, I think we are still, I don't recall what we decided off the top of my head. I know that we were discussing this.
Do you want me to take that, Lindsay?
Go for it.
The generator status is only based on the amount of waste generated each month. It no longer covers any accumulation. So if you exceed an accumulation limit, it does not bump you to a higher generator category. It is only based on the amount of waste generated each calendar month.
And you may find that that is covered more in the small quantity generator, very small quantity and small quantity generator training that we're having on Wednesday. I believe that there's a little more information about that in there because smalls really do have a lot of changes that larges didn't get. So you may see it within there. I don't recall. I haven't looked at it today.
Right.
So in that example, then you would still be a small quantity generator since you said you never generate more than 1 kilogram of acutely hazardous waste or P waste in a month.
Any other questions on used oil, aerosol cans, hazardous waste in general?
All right, keep thinking about them if you have them. We're going to go next to the notification slides that Melissa put together, so you guys learn how to use record info.
All right, I will go ahead and start that video.
Hi, my name is Melissa Free, and I'm an engineer with the Compliance and Permitting section, and today I'm going to talk to you about the Record Info Industry application. The Record Info Industry application allows you to view, edit, and submit documents electronically. The system allows you to manage notification forms, manifests, and annual reports. And I know you all want to know, how do I get an account? We have detailed step-by-step instructions with screenshots and a PDF available on our webpage. You can find it under both the notification and annual reporting sections on the webpage. And I'm going to briefly walk you through it today. The application is run by EPA and is available on their webpage at recordinfo.epa.gov. If you don't have an account yet, you're going to click on the register button to create a new account. If you already have an account, the system has options to help you retrieve your username or reset your password. So once you've clicked the register button, the system will prompt you with two options, the industry user or the regulatory agency user. All of you will choose the industry user registration. Regulatory agency users are for DNREC and EPA employees. And unfortunately, if you create a regulatory user account, I don't have any way to convert it to an industry user account. So I'll have to deny the request and you'll have to start over. So again, we're going to click continue to industry user registration. And I just have a couple quick tips on user accounts. The first is each person must have their own individual account. Sharing of accounts is prohibited. User accounts are linked to an individual person regardless of their employment. So my suggestion to you is that you make your username specific to you rather than your employer. If you change employment, your username will remain the same, and we simply update your contact information and your site permission. So for example, if you work for company ABC and you leave to join company XYZ, your username will remain the same and the site permission related to company ABC can be removed and permission for company XYZ added. You will not create a separate account for each place of employment. And then the last bullet point here, user accounts cannot be transferred to another person. So again, an example, if you work at company ABC and you are leaving, you cannot give your username or password to the person assuming your responsibilities. That person will need to create their own account. But once you've created an account, the next step is to link your sites. You'll select existing site and will be prompted with several search options. You can search by site name, address, or EPA ID number. I find it easiest to search by EPA ID number, but if you don't have that handy, you can search by one of the other fields. Once you've selected a site, you'll need to select a permission level associated with that site. The highest level of permission is the site manager permission, and this allows you to sign documents in all the modules in Record Info and manage your site users. So you can see there on the left is a screenshot of the page, and the very first permission level there is site manager. The remaining 4 modules are listed underneath there. There's the annual report module, the biannual report module, the eManifest module, and the MyRecord ID module. If you don't select the site manager level permission, the remaining levels are module specific, so you'll need to select a permission level for each module that you want to access. The certifier level permission allows you to sign documents. The preparer level allows you to prepare documents but not sign them. So if you're set up as a preparer, your company will also need to have someone set up as a certifier or a site manager in order to sign the document that you've prepared. And then the lowest level of permission is the viewer level, and that's just view-only access to the records in any particular module. Just a note about permission approvals. If your site does not have a site manager approved yet, your request will come to DNREC for approval. One of the very first things I do is verify that the user requesting permission has the authority to access that data. So I look at email addresses and verify that the user's email address matches the company for which they're requesting permission. Contractors and consultants can have accounts in Record Info and can access their client's data, but you have to provide written approval from your client. So if your email address does not match the company for which you're asking permission, you can expect that I'll reach out to you to verify that you have permission from your client to access their data. If your site already has a site manager approved, your request will go to the site manager for approval. It will not come to DNREC. Just a couple quick tips on permission approvals. You'll need to log out and log back in order to see any permission change. So if you get an email saying your permission has been approved, the system doesn't recognize it until you log back in the next time. So if you're still logged in, you'll need to log out and log back in. The other issue I've seen arise a couple times is if your site has a site manager set up, but the site manager is no longer with the company, any permission requests will continue to go to that site manager as long as they are active in Record Info. So if the site manager is no longer there, they often sit in limbo waiting to be approved by that site manager. So if that happens, you'll just need to reach out to me and I can fix that situation. So once your permission has been approved, site managers or certifiers, the next time you log in, you'll be prompted to complete the electronic signature agreement. And this is only for site managers or certifiers because those are the only two permission levels that allow for electronic signatures. EPA uses LexisNexis to verify your personal identity. So it's very important you supply your personal information when answering these questions and not your employer's information. The questions are very similar to what your credit card company uses to verify your identity, such as which of these 4 streets have you lived on, which of these 4 cars have you owned. So you really need to fill it out with your information because it's verifying your identity. And I do want to point out, EPA does not have access to, nor does it store this information. They simply contract with LexisNexis to do the identity verification, and the only thing EPA gets back from that is whether or not LexisNexis can verify the identity. So they'll get back, yes, we can verify the user's identity, or no, we cannot verify the user's identity. If for some reason LexisNexis cannot verify your identity, and there are several reasons for that. If you've moved recently or had a name change, you'll need to submit the paper electronic signature agreement with a wet ink signature. And the system will prompt you to do that. If for some reason it can't verify your identity, it will prompt you to submit that paper electronic signature agreement, and it will tell you where to send it. If you have a site manager set up, it'll direct you to provide that document to your site manager, who can then log into Record Info and approve it. If you don't have a site manager set up, it'll prompt you to mail that document to DNREC, and then I can go in and approve that. So once you log in, the main screen you'll see will be My Sites, and all of the sites for which you have permission will show up here. You can see that I have one site, the DNREC test site, showing up in my account. So once you click on a site, it will show you some basic site details about the site. Across the top, you'll see the name of the site, and on mine it says DNREC test site, the address of the site, and the EPA ID number. That's all in that blue bar across the top. And it pops up on the tab site details, and it gives you just basic details about the site, your hazardous waste generator status, the last date that a notification was submitted, the site's mailing address. So again, just basic details about the site. Next to the site details tab, you'll see a series of other tabs, and those are the modules available in Record Info. My Record ID is the notification module, so that's where you'll be able to see all of your previous notifications and submit new notification forms. The biennial report and annual report module are for submitting your annual reports. EPA created a new tab this year for annual reports for those states that are more stringent and require annual reports. So in odd reporting years, you'll use the biennial report tab. In even reporting years, you'll use the annual report tab. And don't worry, I don't think you can mess that up because EPA actually will lock the biennial reporting module in non-biennial reporting years. So you won't be able to submit a report in the wrong module. The next tab is the e-manifest tab, and that's where you'll be able to see all of your manifest data going back to June 30th, 2018, and that's when EPA's e-manifest system went live. The next tab you'll see on my screen is WEETS, and that's the Waste Import-Export Tracking System. And I don't think any of you will be able to see that because that's in EPA's test database. It's not in the production database yet. So I don't think you'll be able to see that module yet. EPA has also developed some reports available on the industry user application. So you'll see across that top bar next to the home button, there's a button that says reports and extracts. The reports are all PDFs and the extracts are CSV files that can be downloaded and opened in Excel so you can play with the data yourself. And you can see there's only 2 reports available right now. They're both related to e-manifest data, but I did want to at least show you where the reports are. And I believe EPA is working on some new reports for the industry user side. So good news, record info can be used to meet the regulatory record retention requirements. So you're required to maintain copies of your manifests, and if you're a large quantity generator, your annual reports, and record info can be used for that record retention purpose. The caveat is, in order to use record info for record retention purposes, your site has to be able to demonstrate that an employee has a record info industry account and that the account can be accessed to demonstrate compliance. And just one quick note here, if for some reason, so the disposal facility is required to send the manifest either directly to the record info system or to EPA to upload to record info. If for some reason your disposal facility is delayed in doing that, you will need to maintain the paper copy if it's not in the electronic database yet. And the last thing I want to talk about today is site managers. So if you are set up as a site manager, your user requests will automatically be directed to you for approval, so they won't come to DNREC. So you'll see across that top bar, you'll see my sites, outstanding site ID requests, and then pending requests. And there's a green oval with a number in it. And that number will tell you the number of requests that you have awaiting action. Site managers are also responsible for their user maintenance. So if you need to adjust a user's permission, you can do that. This happens often if you have an employee leave your facility and you want to remove their permission to access your site's data. And I'm going to show you how to do that, but I do want to caveat, please do not deactivate the user's account. As I said in the beginning of the presentation, the user's account will stay with them no matter what their place of employment is. So you don't want to deactivate their account. You only want to remove the permission level associated with your site. So you can see across that top blue bar, there's a tools button and then there's a link to user maintenance. So if you click on user maintenance, the first thing you'll see are any pending requests you have for users that have requested permission. And then next to that, you'll see my users. If you click my users, it will show you a list of your users that have access to your site. So once you click on a person's name, you can select the site for which you want to modify permission. And if you want to modify permission for more than one site, there's checkboxes there and you can select multiple sites. So once you've selected the sites for which you want to modify permission, you're going to click the blue modify permissions for selected sites. And this is where you'll be able to modify the user's permission for each of the individual modules in record info. So if you have an employee that's no longer there, you'll want to change all of these to none. But you could also change in the other direction. If you have an employee that is a preparer and you want to be able to make them a certifier, you can do that. So you can change any of your users' permissions right here. And that is all I have on the record info industry application. If you have any questions or any issues with record info, please feel free to reach out. My contact information is on this slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Do we have any? Oh, this one is totally for Melissa. Here's a question. When you leave a site, can you delete your prior site yourself?
Yes, prior to leaving your place of employment, if you request a permission change, so you can request a permission change yourself and change all of those modules to none. If you change them all to none, it will remove all of your permissions related to that site.
All right, anything else, guys? If not, we will jump to a little more live action, if you will. I will show you the website and show us, DNREC's website, how you can get onto listserv, how you find public notices, and where you can find training information or guidance documents. So I'm going to share my screen.
Stop sharing mine.
All right.
It's all yours.
Perfect, thank you. Oh, where'd it go? There it goes. All right, so I have just pulled up the DNREC webpage, the homepage. You can reach this website at dnrec.delaware.gov, or if you want to be more specific and just go to the Waste and Hazardous Division of Waste and Hazardous Substances, if I can speak today, website, you can go to de.gov/DWHS. But I'm going to walk you through going through the main DNREC page, because I think as large quantity generators, a lot of you deal with other programs that are not just waste. You might deal with air, water, sometimes coastal climate and energy, but you never know. So from here, you pick the Division of Waste and Hazardous Substances. Now here you will see this covers all the waste and hazardous substances. We have storage tanks. So if you deal with above ground or underground storage tanks, this would be a group you could talk to. But as we're dealing with waste, and CAPS deals with waste, we're going to go to the hazardous waste page. This is the main hazardous waste page. It's new and shiny. I don't know if anyone has seen the old page, but this is an upgrade in both looks and user friendliness. You will find on here contact information, main drop-down page. And here we have our new hazardous waste menu. We have sub-pages for large quantity generators, small quantity generators, the universal waste rule, episodic generation, household hazardous waste, if you're looking to dispose of your own stuff, not through your site, aerosol cans, and then right here, I will click it now, and then I'll come back. The compliance and permitting training, we said that we would post these up, and here's where your page are. You would find it under the hazardous waste page on the drop-down menu. Large quantity generator, small quantity generator. It is our intent that as other CAPS trainings come up, we will be putting them on this page as well. So you can always come check back here for more information. Back to the main hazardous waste webpage. So along with all this other information, we have fact sheets at the bottom. This is a growing list, but all the fact sheets you see on here presently are up to date for the generator improvement rule. You will also see there's a pharmaceutical waste management guide, waste determination guide, how to manage aerosol cans, used oil, satellite accumulation area management, which would highlight things like how to label the containers, how to maintain those areas, and your overall basic business guide for hazardous waste management. So within here and on many of the pages, you can find links to the regulations. Now, I'm going to click on this link, and this link shows, this is the page most people are familiar with. This is the format that the old regulations and what will be our current regulations, once they are merged in here, will look like. Presently, the register has not put them together. Our apologies for that. So if you are checking to see which regs apply to you, these are the old ones, but they're not all not valid because the generator improvement will only address certain sections of the hazardous waste regulations. So for instance, when we were talking about requirements for large quantity generators, which is in 262.17, you will see that 262.17 is not on this website yet. It is going to be housed in the register section, and I'm going to show you how to get there now. So here is what the Delaware regulations website looks like. You can get this by going to regulations.delaware.gov. And until the register merges the two regulations together, you're going to have to fact check both just to make sure you're abiding by the correct regulation. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask us. We know that this is confusing and not ideal, but we're all working through it together. So the generator improvement rule and the pharmaceutical rule were promulgated in January of 2021. So they're found in volume 24. We go to January, click PDF, it's easier. It'll open right up for you. Delaware Register of Regulations. Scroll down. Now in the Register of Regulations, should this ever come up again, you'll see things that are proposed regulations and then final. Given that our regs are final, they're going to be in the second section. You're going to see the Department of Natural Resources Environmental Control, Division of Waste and Hazardous Substances, regulations governing hazardous waste. You don't have to keep scrolling to page 711. You can click, it goes straight to it. From here, this explains the background, and then the reasons and conclusions, and then it has the final rules. Now, you don't see them all printed out because it is quite lengthy. So from here, click on this next link, and here is the PDF of the final rule. Now, as you're scrolling through, you can use Control F to find what you need. I'm going to do that right now, actually, so I can pull up the information for you. So, for instance, I typed in 262.17, which is the rules for large quantity generators, but it's going to pull up all of them. But so I can show you what has changed and what hasn't. Anything that is underlined on the PDF is new. Let me get to a striked out section. For instance, right here on G, the strikeout means it is no longer the regulatory requirement. The underlined is what is now the regulation. So you will see that like 261.4 is in there. Now that will also match the old regulations. 262.17. Trying to think of parts that have changed, but primarily this is where you will go to find your generator improvement rule, and you're going to have to mix and match. Hopefully the registrar will do this shortly.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was just going to clarify. The registrar did tell us that they were going to try to have that done by the end of last week. You can see that that hasn't happened yet, so hopefully it will be there soon, so you won't have to go to two different places to see the current regulations.
Correct. So for instance, I'll show you 262.11 because that is crucial. So 262.11 hazardous waste determinations did change. You will see that it is now specified that it must be an accurate hazardous waste determination. So A, B, C, and D were stricken, but then they were put back in and modified because the new generator improvement did that. So you're going to be paying attention to the underlying sections. And as I said previously, not all of the regulations were changed. So you may have to go back to the regular regulation page, which is this, and eventually it will all merge onto here. The links that you see on our fact sheets or on our main webpage take you to here. The register page is a separate page, so it's important that you guys know to go to regulations.delaware.gov, look for January 1st, 2021, and click the PDF. And then you can go to the hazardous waste regs. And we'll be sure to let you guys know when they all get put together. So that is getting to the regulations. Now we are going to talk about getting on email lists so we can notify you for trainings, any other information we have going out there. DNREC email list. You're going to scroll down, hazardous waste programs. It's just that simple. That's pretty much how you got this training, was you already signed up. But you can also sign up for DNREC news releases, DNREC public notices, any other sections you want to know information on. If I click it, it's going to take me to a very weird site, so I won't click it. Public notices. So public notices are helpful for anyone who has to do permitting, anyone who is dealing with regulation changes. So our regulations went through public notice. If you sign up to be public notices, you will know when regulations change. We do also try and tell you through the listserv. Public meetings and events. Here's where you sign up, where you'd see if there's a training on there. So it's just public meetings calendar. And there's not really much to say about this page because we're here today and then we're hosting another one on Wednesday. But if you ever have any interest in any public meetings, this is where you'd find them all. Now, you cannot get to these pages through us per se. What happens with that is you go through the Office of the Secretary, not the page for Division of Waste and Hazardous Substances. So you can go to Public Affairs, Public Meetings, Public Notices, contact us. If you guys have any FOIA requests for anything, put them through here as well, and then they get disseminated down. You don't have to contact us directly. I want to show you something else on this, our hazardous waste webpage. So as we talked about the notification forms, there is the notification reporting. This will be handy for you guys who have to do annual reports and anyone who has to change site notifications. This is where you can do it. We have our emails, hazardous waste reporting, small quantity, large quantity generator, everything like that. Instructions for electronic reporting, submitting hazardous waste reports, instructions, RCRA info application. Let's see, oh, is it going to work or is it going to make it seem like it did? So if you click on that within our page, it takes you right to RCRA info. Easy peasy. All right, I can't think, did I miss anything, guys? Is there anything else I should show?
No, I don't think so.
Don't think so.
All right. Oh,
We
and
have a
obviously,
question.
I'll
Yeah,
show
same
you
way.
one of the new handy fact sheets that we've done. For those of you who've been around a while, they look a little different, but again, they do cover all of the generator improvement rule changes. So they're all in there. All right, let me stop sharing, see if anyone has any questions.
You want me to read it while you're
Yep.
stopping sharing?
No, okay, I'm back.
If the question is, if the TSDF is located at a distance greater than 200 miles from the point of generation, can the facility hold waste for up to 270 days? That's a provision for small quantity generators, so it won't be applicable to most of you large quantity generators, but it is applicable to small quantity generators. The caveat is it has to be a facility. You must have to send it greater than 200 miles. So there can't be a facility that is capable of treating that waste within 200 miles. If that is the only facility that is capable of treating that waste and it's greater than 200 miles away, then yes, you can avail yourself to the 270-day provision as opposed to 180 days.
Also, for large quantity generators, if the waste is F006, so that would be a wastewater treatment sludge from the electroplating process. And again, with the same provisions as it's the only TSDF you can send it to. And for large quantity generators, potentially. But otherwise, if you need an extension, large quantity generators could request a 30-day extension from DNREC because you already hold the waste for 90 days and then you'd have to contact us to get an additional 30 days.
We do have another question in the chat. Do the waste codes that appear on the labels placed by the waste disposal vendor at the time of pickup satisfy the new EPA waste code requirement, or do we need to add them to the label earlier in the accumulation process?
So the waste codes need to go on your label before they're shipped off-site. So if your vendor puts on a new label on your waste before they're shipped off-site that includes the waste code, that should satisfy the requirement.
Give a couple more seconds for anyone else who has any questions. All right, do we have anything else? If not, we'll let you guys out of here 30 minutes early. And again, if anyone comes up with questions, our emails are available where our information, our contact info is all over the hazardous waste webpage. And again, the training information is on the hazardous waste main page, drop-down menu under compliance and permitting training. So if that is it today, I thank everyone for your participation and please have a wonderful day.
Stop the recording.
Yes.